creating your own exception classes. So let's create some exception classes. This is what you would want to do in a larger program, rather than just creating your own or using the standard exception um, like that. You want to sometimes create your own exception. So let's say you're making a game and you want to create an exception for when the character is out of bounds. So the way you do that is click on the class. You say, I want to create my new class. Let's call it outside of field exception. By convention, all exceptions are named, something exception. And what you want to do is just make sure it extends the exception class. This one right here. So the java.language.exception class is the one, it's the super class, and well, we'll click finish. And there it is. So it's the outside of field exception, which extends the exception class. Now, because it is extends exception, it will have two constructors: the zero argument constructor, and the one that takes in a string argument. And by default, it's going to hurt those from its parent. So we can leave that there. I'm going to then write a class here, public, I'm sorry, a method, public static void, try move person, and let's say, this has some logic in here. Boolean, something goes wrong, and that's going to be true. And if something goes wrong, then I'm going to throw new outside of field exception. Right, so you can do it like that. So I created a new exception outside of field exception that extends the exception class, and now I can throw that. I can throw it the same way I did before, but uh, it's got a different name. You see it doesn't work here, and if I hover over it, it's going to tell me I need to either add a throws decoration or surround this with a try catch block. I want to add throws like that. And so now the method is throwing an outside of field exception. And so when I come over here, I call it move person. And you can see it's going to again tell me there's a problem because this method here, move person, throws this exception and it's a checked exception, so I have to catch it. I can either throw it, which means main throws it, which means the program will crash, or really I should catch it, right? And so we can do that. We can catch it here. Caught exception. So we caught the exception. Oops. There we go. And now we can try to run this. Click there. Try to run this, and you see that outside of field exception. So we caught the exception, and then we got our stack trace there. So that works, right? And that's how you would do this. Get rid of this. Run it again. Now it just prints out caught the exception because we caught it. So there you go. And now that is a regular exception, and this is mostly what you're going to be using when you write a big program and you want to extend, you want to create a bunch of special exceptions for your code. These will be particular to your program. And these are all the idea of, they all have to be caught, right? So the idea is you're going to define these exceptions like outside of field exception, and those have to be caught by you or the other people on your team whenever that happens. There are other types of exceptions. There are the runtime exceptions, and those are exceptions that should make your program crash. So those are things that should never happen. We call those runtime exceptions. Like for example, is division by zero. If you try to divide 8 by the number zero, that there is no answer to that. So that should make your program crash. That should never ever happen. So if you try to divide number by zero, um, x divided by zero, and I try to run that, I'm gonna get the arithmetic expression runtime exception division by zero. And the program will crash, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. Similarly, when you try to index an array, so if you have an array that is of size 10, um, and then you try to do, 11, so access out of bounds, so that is also a runtime exception. You cannot do that. It doesn't make sense. You want the program to crash. So you might want those kind of exceptions in your program, right? So the way you do that is the same way you did this, but instead of extending exception, you're going to extend runtime exception. So let's do that. We're going to call this really bad division too many players exception. So the program should crash if that happens, and then the superclass is not exception or object, it's going to be runtime exception. So java.language.runtime exception. Finish that, and there are too many players exception extends runtime exception. The neat thing about this is I'm going to go here to move person, and before something goes wrong here, or well, let's just get rid of that. And I'm going to say throw new too many players exception. And I'm going to get rid of this throws clause up here. And you can see, well, I'm going to get rid of this catch too from before. And you can see that now there's no problem. There's no red marks, and this will run. Right? So I can throw this new exception. I don't with if the exception extends runtime exception, then I do not need to add a throws clause or put a try catch block, right? So I can call move person like that. It doesn't, you see, move person has no throws method, so I don't know that it's going to throw something. And of course, if I run it, it will crash, right? It's going to actually will raise the too many players exception, and the program will crash. So that's the difference between the runtime exception or an exception that extends runtime exception. This exception does not need a try catch block, whereas this exception, because it extends exception, this one does need a try catch block or a throws clause, right? And that's the difference. Mostly the runtime exceptions, like this one, you're only going to use those 4 times when you want the program to crash. So this will be like a hardware problem or a really severe thing. And